Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Rollwise podcast, your show where we talk about all things role playing and the things adjacent. Today, we actually have a very special episode because we have our first ever guest. Our first guest, Wrel, is actually a game creator, an indie designer, and also has done many other things in many fields at this point. Is going to talk a little bit about his new game, which is currently on backerkit, called Distal. So, because we're excited to talk about the game and all those kind of things, and we're excited for you to have the opportunity to share your game with as many people as we can, let's go ahead and we're going to start with that most basic of questions. What is Distal? Where do we get? Let's go with that. What is Distal?
Sweet. So Distal is a new D20 fantasy RPG. I like to say that it focuses on hardships, not heroes. And a lot of the mechanics are built around that, or a lot of the mechanics support that idea. And there's a lot of really interesting takes on the modern D20 fantasy genre, I guess, drawing a lot of inspiration from Dungeons and Dragons and Pathfinder and even games like Dragonbane and that sort of thing. There's a long way to go,
Mhm.
and I think that it is well on its way to get there.
Sweet. Now it's interesting you should mention inspirations because inspirations probably speaks to me in a way to understand like your headspace when you're going through all those kind of things. And you mentioned a good number of RPG type inspirations and all that stuff. Would you say that there's any inspirations that are like in the non-RPG world that kind of like said, "Oh, I really like how like I mean the whole like a lot of people like Hayao Miyazaki and those kind of like things for certain types of feels in the environment. Do you have any inspirations that are non-RPG games that you brought into this that you like?
Okay, so I mean, Lord of the Rings, the whole world of Distal is like it's meant to be familiar, but also push the boundaries a little bit. Very like Tolkien, Gygaxian,
Mhm.
sort of everyday fantasy,
Okay.
which uh, so it should read very easily to people who are familiar with the most modern games and that sort of thing. I really like the idea that uh, when I think about heroes, we kind of represent them in a really weird way. Nowadays, they're more like superheroes. Like, when you think about modern Dungeons and Dragons, Fifth Edition in particular, and Pathfinder, like it only takes a handful of levels to get to the point where you're like borderline demigod, sort of status when you compare it to like just a normal person.
Mhm.
But when I think of uh, heroes, I think like Lord of the Rings. While you still have powerful beings there, the whole series is like it's more about small people overcoming odds in spite of the circumstances, not because it's guaranteed, because
Mhm.
they need to do it because nobody else is going to. That's kind of how I define a hero. And I really wanted to try to get back to some of that
Mhm.
by grounding the game more. And it's still high fantasy. There's still plenty of magic and that sort of thing. But just looking back, I think Lord of the Rings with a lot less walking is probably where I end up.
Well, if it doesn't have a ton of tightening of the belt, I don't know, Rel. Like that's gotta. Then we
Well,
tighten the belt again. Uh-oh.
no,
Yeah. So I think. Go
I
ahead.
think that's really good. Just because I think there is a lot less punching up in the modern fantasy genre. A lot more of we're super powerful. We have a lot of say. So I think that's really interesting. Go ahead. Sorry.
No, you bring up a good point because I recently there's been a trend towards OSR, old school role playing, where it's a little bit more about the story and a little bit less about the characters. Because frankly, a lot of the systems there's a lot of lethality. Like there's a lot of potential player death, which I think for a long time role playing was trending away from. But it's interesting to me because I used to not like that in a system, and we play a lot of games, and I like there being a chance that we could die and that we could die doing something heroic, that we could I just blanked. I just
Well,
totally
it's
go
okay.
ahead.
Here, I'm
Fill the
gonna
space,
add to
Mike.
yours. I'm gonna
Yeah.
add to yours because I think that there's something really interesting about it, and this is one of probably the core concepts and something I really glomped onto as I was reading and trying to figure out how this plays in the game. Is the whole idea that death marks in Distal is something that I find very fascinating because, as we played various systems and everything like that, I've been reading a lot more adventures to kind of get ideas on remixing and how I can do these kind of things. And I saw this old adventure for old. It was an older adventure for Lamentations of the Flame Princess. And literally the first thing that you can do is you can walk up to a door and you can like if you try to open the door and you didn't knock, you just die. And the thing was like, oh, the snake bites you, instant death. And I was like, what? Where did that come from? Like anybody that knows the adventure I'm talking about is going to be like, yeah, I lost a player there. And I'm like, I don't know if that's necessarily fun.
Well,
But on the
well, it's anti-character development. Like you're not. And I think that's one of the cool things about your game is there is more character development philosophically behind it.
Yeah, and it's that straddling of the of the thing where if you do make it to that point where you're like, oh gosh, I'm on death's door, it's not just like, oh, I'm a superhero. I just kind of like I just rise back up and I'm back on my feet again. It's like, okay, well, I have these consequences, and all that kind of stuff. And for those of you that don't know what we're talking about, do you want to go in a little bit and tell us about death marks and kind of like how did you conceive death marks? Where does that come from, and how is it represented in your play?
Yeah, so Distal is definitely trying to. Okay, so to be totally clear, Distal is not an OSR experience. Just for all the viewership, it's like I have no interest in you touching a door and dying or walking down the wrong alleyway and getting your limbs hacked off. This game is very much about kind of creating that sort of satisfying character arc, and that usually entails getting to play them for for quite some time so that you can discover the character kind of as you play. So, and I think that that's one of the things that D&D is really good at is that even the GMs are like protecting their players because their players are very invested in the characters. And my take on it was like, what if we can ground the game a little bit more? I refer to it as grounded, not gritty, where we're trying to like make things have a little bit more meaningful stakes, but at the same time, we want you to be able to kind of like in, incur consequences and then react to them in a way that moves your character forward. So death marks in particular is one of the many supporting mechanics that try to convey this process. And what it is when you drop to 0 health, you start accruing death marks until you're stabilized. You can withstand or like accrue quite a few death marks because it's meant to be a long term mechanic. But I mean, if people just leave you on the ground and don't pick you up, then yes, you're going to die. But the point is that in the normal cycle of play, somebody goes down, and the timer is ticking, and that creates a sort of you're trying to look out for your players because those death marks do not go away; they're permanent. Too many, sweet forever sleep. It's and when you recover from the combat, you've fallen down, and there are lasting repercussions. First of which is that you kind of you cross off a skill that just a pip in a skill, and then you also gain maximum health. So much like scar tissue deadens the feeling, it makes you more resilient to death. The actual tuning will probably need to play more with just to kind of get a feel for everything. But conceptually, it's meant to give the GM the ability to hammer a party and for the party to be okay when something goes down because they know that it's not the end of the world. The stakes just rise. When the characters recover, they consider what the next steps are. Like, are they too close to death's door? Has adventuring taken such a toll already, or like throughout the process that maybe it just makes sense for them to retire? Should they change their style of fighting? How can they still support their teammates and that sort of thing? So you also, uh, falling over is, I think, giving GMs permission to challenge their players is a major focus of this game, and I'm hoping that it comes to fruition based on the framework that has been constructed.
Yeah, and I think I personally think that's an interesting mechanic because you also tie it into certain class features, and I really, as I was reading through and I was looking at it, like just to kind of tie it to the death marks to one of the classes, specifically the ferryman, was I think a very novel and very interesting way of saying you have a character that's incentivized a little bit to kind of straddle that line and and basically place in that kind of that duality of like near death experience. And it's like you play too long with it, obviously your character retires, and completes the journey. But I thought that was neat that you incorporated that concept into the way their skills play and how they feel as a character class. So that was kind of cool in my opinion.
I did tweak it too, because there's definitely some. So the ferryman class, just for everybody, it's a casting class, but the more death marks they accrue, the more spell slots they get. The more magic they can cast, that sort of thing.
Mhm.
But there's definitely like conflicting interests if you're going to be like a player that is really incentivized to like min max your character. Like, oh yeah, no, just put me down for like 10 rounds and I'll be good. So I made a small tweak so that it's like, okay, you still benefit from the death marks, but it's capped at your level bonus for like the spell slot. So you still have to progress the character because that's what your character would want to do is,
Yeah.
keep going on and accruing power.
Yeah. No, it's just like I said, it was just I thought it was a very interesting way of tying that to your mechanic is to have it be in there. Now, I know that the ferryman was the only one that I saw in the alpha packet that had specific mechanics around that. Did you have plans for other aspects of play being affected by death marks?
Yeah, so the specialties, which are feats,
Mhm.
basically, there's a few of them that require you to have certain amount of death marks in order to take them on.
Mm.
So one of the things that you can do to kind of like just customize the character a little bit, and then figure out how much you want to lean into to death as just as the player. Um, Aside from that, there might be some more classes in the future that kind of manipulate that a little bit, but the ferryman is like that's the all in. Yeah.
Yeah, speaking of classes, one of the things that I think is really interesting about the game and I really liked is sort of your reinvention of some of the archetypes that D&D has. Like they're all a little bit different. Like the Ember Gut is the one that comes to mind. I think that's really cool. The kind of reinvention that you've done of some of the classic character classes. I know the Ferryman comes up because it's it seems to come up a lot more because it ties directly into the death mark mechanic, which is so innovative. But I think just the reinvention of some of the character classes is really cool. So what kind of inspired you to kind of change up the classes with like adding the Falconer and the Ember Gut and stuff like that?
Yeah, I really I like the idea of being able to be more specific. So Dungeons and Dragons kind of has they have to create broad uh, classes, and then you can be more specific with the subclasses in that. But I didn't want to go the subclass direction, and I wanted to make sure that Distal has its own fantasy, like a specific fantasy setting. It's not meant to, at this point, play in multiple different types of settings and that sort of thing. So I wanted everything to tie to the world in some way, and some classes certainly do that more than others, but all of them can be played in many different ways, and it will make sense to the themes of the class. For example, like the Oracle is a casting class that deals with the threads of fate. So you see like a lot of mechanics that are centered around not just actual manipulation of threads, like like the three fates or the Norns. Is that what they're
Mhm.
called?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, but also there's like some mechanics that kind of allude to uh, like Taroka and just those sorts of elements. And but they're all like you get to pick and choose how you want to build the character and how you want to represent them in play, just due to it's kind of sort of branching elements that occur as you level up.
Yeah, it's very cool, and I think everybody who's watched the show knows that I'm against the subclass option and the fact that you can play a game for 3 levels and never actually play your character. The character you want to play, it irritates the shit out of me.
Or even better, if that D&D Beyond stuff is to be believed, there's a lot of people that start characters and actually never will, like, they'll be like, oh, 6th level, I don't know what epic is, I don't know what anything in this game. So
yeah, they never learn what the subclasses are, what your real class is. That's true. So
it's true.
No, they're very cool. I'm very excited to play one of those the newer classes. I think they're very cool. They have a lot of flavor. So, and I think
so I got a question.
Yeah.
When you're moving through Age of Worms right now, and when you get to the point where you decide to flip the switch, give Distal a shot in that setting, currently you're playing through DC20, another D20 system. Are you going to recreate the same characters?
That's an interesting question, because the answer is yes. So the idea is we're not in so much as that you say, like, we're going to take we're going to take a mage and like forced conversion and all that. No, we're just going to take the flavor of the character and move it between different systems. And so, we had basically decided at the beginning of this adventure that we we're going to go on about trying these different systems was that Jeff was going to take a caster type class and Brent was going to take a martial type class. Now, whether or not he goes like a straight archetypal fighter or a straight archetypal mage, that's probably not going to be how it goes. And I think in your game that might actually be a little bit tricky to transfer 1-to-1, because the DC20 game seems like it's very very analogous to D&D in many ways, whereas you definitely take a step and it's like, I mean, in your case, what would be the archetypical fighter for you? It would be the Justicar, I guess.
Strategist is like the fighter.
Yeah.
Probably the most generic fightery bit, but and then there's a mage that would be like Magister. So that's your real arcanist.
The answer for my character is which one has the most hit points. That's the answer for my character.
Brent doesn't always roll the best, and so he needs a little extra bonus for survivability. I think that
that's generous to say. Brent likes to do dumb stuff, Jeff.
We do try to play our characters. We try not to metagame. I've done plenty of that when I was younger, and it isn't as exciting as it used to be. It's more exciting to actually go, this is really what my character would do. I know better. I know this is a horrible decision, but my character is so caught up in the moment that this is what's going to happen. One of the things that attracted me to Distal when I was first reading about it was the consequences and the chances that it gives you for these interesting moments of character growth. Like you mentioned Lord of the Rings, like there are a lot of horrific things that happen, but not everybody dies. But for most of them, the characters are changed in some way after the fact. They've evolved, they've grown, they've learned. And I think it helps make a more epic character arc. At least that's what I'm hoping for, from reading what you've put down on paper so far. And I'm looking forward to doing that.
Yeah. And it's actually kind of interesting because I think the one thing that we might not be able to dive into as deep, now that you mentioned the Age of Worms and kind of how we're going to be going each, kind of system by system through this and see how each of these systems play into it, is that we probably won't be able to tackle the background stuff as much. And backgrounds are a fascinating thing for me in terms of D&D, really any game, because backgrounds are always the one thing that it's like, I don't want to say easy to muck up, but it's the one thing where it's like, you got one person who's like, who's your character? Well, I have a sword, don't I? Must be a warrior. How did you get here? Do I have a horse? Sure. That like there's zero thought into the backstory, and that in itself can evolve over time. That's fine. But then there's also the people that show up with a novel and they're like, I've written my novel. You should probably read this before we start play so you can be aware of everything. But what I found with your game is it's very different in so much as that it uses that prompt system. And I think it doesn't, you don't get choice paralysis because you don't have like 500 million things to do, but also you have a very concise way in which your character develops. Can you go a little bit into your background system, just so people know, and since we won't necessarily cover that one again?
Absolutely. So the when you're creating your character, you do it. There's plenty of steps, but the one of the early one of the ones that you face early on is that you create a background for your character, and we do that by using 2 sentences with 4 prompts that you fill in based on tables that you roll on. At least we encourage you to roll on the tables because it can create some very interesting combinations and help kind of prevent you from always falling into familiar, comfortable tropes. Uh, the the way that we do it is that we have so it's just 2 sentences. The first is I grew up prompt
Mhm.
and my days were spent prompt, and then I became a prompt the day
The day
prompt. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, and all of the individual prompts that you roll on give you mechanical benefits to your character as well. It's a way to uh, express your character not only through the narrative, but also through the actual benefits that they're gaining. So, if you grew up on the streets, you're probably more adept at uh, just understanding the layout of the streets, sneaking around.
Mhm.
Maybe you know how to part people from their money more easily, and all these little odds and ends are represented in the background system. We drill into so the level of specificity in a system like this super important. If
Mhm.
it's too vague, then it actually has that choice paralysis, like you mentioned.
Mhm.
So it has the opposite effect of instead of inspiring creativity. I mean, it depends a lot on the person, but it could just they could resort to falling back on a familiar trope when they
Mhm.
think, if you get the word sunflower and it's like, oh yeah, sunny, happy, that sort of thing. It doesn't really leave a whole lot of room for interpretation, even though you've been given such a small thing. So we have a little bit more detail. So I grew up in the streets is like an example.
Mhm.
Or I grew up with a silver spoon. So if
Mhm.
you're Richie Rich, kind of everything was handed to you on a silver platter. Um, so we give you enough there, but the way that you interpret all these different prompts is left to the imagination. At the
Mhm.
same time, if your GM is knocking down your door saying that they need a backstory, the 2 sentences,
Mhm.
it's pretty much good. And
Mhm.
then the context that you'd like generate
Yeah.
from that, it just makes it easy. And systemizing the just the backgrounds, but also other social structures
Mhm.
in the game was super important to me. So like just to no, I'm talking a lot. Um,
No, please
but
do.
Yeah.
to go into like so the next step after, or rather after you've created characters, after everybody in your table has created characters,
Mhm.
you all create an organization.
Mhm.
Mhm.
And an organization is like it's meant to be what happens at session 0.
Mhm.
You're building uh, your means of everybody being connected to one another, your reputation, like as a group, what the group is even called. If it's
Mhm.
a mercenary organization, there's tables to roll and that sort of thing too. But it's a team building exercise because instead of one person rolling on the prompts and saying like, "Here, this is what it is,"
Mhm.
it's uh, it's you all figuring out
Mhm.
what works, and it also helps like the table and the GM get a feel for what sorts of themes the players care about.
Mhm.
If they're looking at their organization and then everybody's super excited about, um, you know, being like I forget the actual prompt, but like one is like delving in ancient ruins and that sort of thing. Like that's what you're known for. Then
Mhm.
the GM probably knows like okay, so we want to give you opportunities to do that
Mhm.
sort of thing. So there's a lot of mechanics that are built like that because the social layer
Mhm.
for TTRPGs in general is considered on top of the base game. It's built into the base game.
Yeah. And honestly, it's really an interesting part that you bring up with the whole backgrounds and building an organization because to me, I find it to be a very elegant way for people to have a nice balance that actually impacts gameplay, but still doesn't mean you default to Bob the fighter, right? Because I think if everyone is put on the spot, they're like, oh, I need a character tonight. I write Bob the fighter. That's the D&D Beyond joke, is it's everyone was Bob the fighter, I guess. But I mean, I looked at it and I was like, oh, if I need a quick character, my go-to is literally Bob the fighter, so but I don't, like I get into like all those other things, and it's like hard for me to give Bob any kind of flavor or interesting components to him. I'm just basically a piece of parchment that kind of I figure out as I go. But the fact that you have the prompts be just that 2 sentences, it really helps out because it gives you an idea as to who you should play as, from the role playing perspective. And then the organization tells you why you should be together. And obviously, Brent has commented on this before, where he says, well, a group of adventurers can just be together because they're together. Like,
it's good that there's a reason, but like a lot of people just hang out because they just happen to be there at the same time.
So, but it's neat, and it's a fascinating and I think an elegant way to make the solution very simple for everyone to go through at the table. That's my personal thought.
No, yeah. And I think one thing that's cool about it, and sorry, Jeff, but
no, go ahead.
I'll let you talk in a second. One of the things I think is cool about it is something that I think you talked about in a video you did about Daggerheart, where D&D does something and D20 games does something that, like, I think it's by accident, but that's really good. Whereas it kind of appeals to all the types, like archetypes of gamers, like the loot person and everything like that. I think having the backgrounds be so flexible but precise allows all of those different types of people to actually make a background for your character. Whereas there's players that you'll never have actually do that. Like they'll show up to they'll be like, yeah, my parents are all deceased. I don't have any friends. I wander the woods alone. And it's like, no, just do this. And I think it makes that really easy, because you will have those people that are just like, and it also balances out the people that are like, which ones can I pick to be more powerful than everybody else in the group? So I think that's really good. It appeals to kind of that broad range of people that you get when you play a game sort of like D&D, where that appeals to a wide range of people. Because what you said you said in the interview also was that, like, people that are play like Monster of the Week or games like that, like they all have to be of a similar mindset, because a narrative game, like, you all have to be pointed in the same direction. Whereas these games, what they allow is you have a wider range of people who get something out of the game that don't necessarily have the same desires or expectation. And I think the background helps with that. And I think that's really cool. Like that social layer that you talked about. So go ahead, Jeff, it's your turn. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I was just, with the organization, it sounds like it's a small thing, but it gets all of the players to buy in to the world, which is a problem in a lot of games that we have played. I have been that problem player. I'm the guy where Mike's like, okay, you got a week to create a character. And I show up like 15 minutes before we start going, I don't have my character. And every time I've done that, it has been a suboptimal experience, not only for me, but for the party that I'm in. And the game having these prompts built in, I think, makes it better, because we have played several games now that use a prompting thing. It's a much more modern concept in role playing, and I think it helps. And it's for these little things. You get buy-in, you get ideas. Even with the backgrounds, it's broad enough that you have choices, but it's not so constricting that you're tied into just one thing.
And you're probably not going to do what I do a lot, which is write a background of a really cool character, and then none of his abilities actually like point in that direction, and they fall flat on their face.
That's what I find is more funny than anything. Is sometimes you have these backgrounds that sound really cool, but then your character can't apparently do any of those things in actual play.
Yeah.
So having those tied in is pretty neat. Yeah. I did have a question though, because I mean, you did a lot of work in the video game world and everything like that. How did your experience in that world influence Distal in its creation?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I guess from a knowledge point of view, I think learning more about human beings, question mark, maybe, is, I was I was a very visible figure within the game that I worked on, which was Planetside 2, and that lasted for about 7 years. and I was a very visible face prior to that. So I've seen all of the different types of people that can play a game, and I have a better understanding on uh, kind of learning how to filter feedback, which is I think helpful in the creation of any sort of game, where you have to like don't listen to what people are saying, listen to what they're or rather don't listen to what they're telling you or saying. I don't know. Anyway, you you get to the
There's basically
they
you're
can
trying to
say
read between the lines, right?
exactly. Yeah, yeah.
Actions speak louder than words.
Basically, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So like they can say that they want something, but what is the underlying reason for that
Mhm.
desire?
Mm-hmm.
Uh, so I think that's been helpful, and then also just I think maybe some of the actual skills that I developed, not within the gaming industry itself, but kind of all the peripheral components, like
Mhm.
very active on social media. I learned how to send out press releases,
Mhm.
to folks. Actually, that I learned a little bit of that while I was in the Navy too. But
Oh.
um, just everything that kind of like surrounds the space of being in a corporate structure
Mhm.
and having to go out and be entrepreneurial on your own. Something that I'm also have done a number of different times, but it's all been very helpful. And I think probably most importantly is that the 7 years that I spent in the games industry, I've grown a lot as a person.
Mhm.
Where I used to be this person who was very uh, just wholly dedicated to the work, and also thought that everybody else should work as hard as I do.
Mhm.
So over time, I've softened. I've created, I've gained an understanding of when to be kind, and also how to be kind, like as a human being, and learning how to manage people. And I think that some of the benefits of that may not be evident is that you learn how to design and interact with people better. Just creating relationships, like this.
Well, we appreciate it, and so that actually leads me to two questions. First question is that just so everybody knows, I mean, this is like you're a solo author for this game. That's correct, right?
That's right.
And that is absolutely amazing because the one thing I would say is that I've seen people put out games. I go on to itch.io and I look at games and I see authors and all that stuff. But I think the actual scale of the game that you're attempting to create is a lot more than I've seen a single person really dive into. So first of all, that is amazing by
Yeah.
my things. 'Cause I mean, I'm not saying it's unknown because I'm sure that there are some out there. I may, of course, not know about them. But then the second thing I'm curious about is that you've had this actually. You do have some people that play test the game and stuff like that, and we're obviously going to try to give this some paces, let's call it. And so, what feedback have you had from people so far that you've influenced as you go through your versions? Like, I guess what's one really good piece of feedback that you said, "Hey, this is how the game has changed from that."
Oh, let's see. One piece. I mean, there's been so much because we were running playtests daily. They're
Wow.
just like, well, me and my girlfriend were running the playtest just like we were playing the game, and
It
then we
counts.
had then more than that, uh, or rather, at least one other person weekly. So that's just like internal.
Mhm.
Very easy for me to speak to them, get a real
Mhm.
solid feedback from people who know how to give feedback, which is something that isn't easily gotten a lot of times. And I think just the actual playing of the game has created a lot of that. And then people would, so we have a Discord,
Mhm.
and while it's
Yeah.
kind of sleepy, I feel like I will occasionally get people sending me messages because they will evaluate the game, or they'll play like a session
Mhm.
off, with their group, or they'll try to introduce the game to their group and then get rejected. And even learning why they don't want to play a new game is,
Mhm.
I mean, there's many reasons for that, obviously, but just hearing it being recounted is
Yeah.
something that's helpful to me, because if I figure out that there are places that could be smoothed over, like the
Mhm.
background system, that used to be kind of toward the end of the character creation process,
Mhm.
and and it was just such a powerful addition that it made sense for it to inform the rest of your character. So like that's
Yes.
a good piece of feedback. And a lot of these things I've just been like kind of either kicking around or on the fence about, but until you hear it from other people to help like kind of push you over
Yeah.
the edge, sometimes it can be difficult to just pull the trigger on a decision.
No, I'm sure with playtesting, the more like feedback is a gift, obviously, and so the more you can get of it, the better you can make the game. I did find it funny though. I was reading through one subreddit, and somebody was just like, "I'm guerrilla making my players play this new game," and then they were like, "So I've homebrewed these rules." And so they were like inserting the rules of this other game until it finally just, instead of being this weird chimera, just emerged at the other end of the chrysalis as the game intended. I was like, that's kind of weird. But maybe there's something to that,
But genius at the same time.
It's like there was a piece of me as a DM, I was like, maybe there's more than this than I
Right.
thought.
Well, what it really says is there's a lot of D&D that you can change that probably can make an entirely different game without people noticing.
Yeah. So not to say that that's what we want people to do, but I just thought it was funny because you were like, "Oh, you don't want to play my game? Well, try some of these rules."
I don't know. However,
Right.
however you can get people to play new games, I'm for it. Like,
Yeah. There are so many games out there, and there's so many cool concepts that the more games you play, the better you get at playing the games that you love. You get exposure to different things. You break out of some of your norms, and it opens up doors. And sometimes you find that like, shit, I thought all I wanted to play was D&D, and now it's like, I can't wait to play stuff like Fabula Ultima or Monster of the Week or, Unknown Armies, Delta Green. There's just so many games out there that are underserved.
I was gonna say the Age of Worms conversion to Delta Green is gonna be real hard. But
But you know what? I think at that point, I'm going to turn over the reins to you, Brent, because I am not.
Yeah, you can GM that one, Brent. That'll be fine. Mike and I'll die.
That would be pretty interesting. I'm waiting for the when we do the peasant funnel Age of Worms, when we do the Dungeon Crawl Classic Age of Worms, where we're all playing scullery maids and chimney sweeps.
I did have a question. This one's a little different, but you're going through a process now, a creative process, pretty unlike anything that any of us have done. And if you can just shoot yourself, I don't know, 5-10 years into the future, it's completed, right? I know that's maybe hard to see the end right now where you're at, but however you imagine it completing, when you look back at this time that you're going through now, what do you think your biggest takeaway? What do you think the thing that you learned, the biggest lesson that you learned from surviving the creative process and actually publishing something?
So
I'm sorry if that's too weird.
No, it's not, because I'm already at the point where I would love to reset a few months and just start over, because there are so many things that I would do differently if I were trying to start a game. Like, first off, I would have stronger art, because it's so much easier to get people on board when they just see a good piece of art. And that is one of the things that I'm like, one of the reasons why I'm running the backer kit in the first place, is that I don't have money and I need art. But with the money that I did have, earlier, until I wasted my 401k, it would be, that would be the starting point.
Okay.
That way I can get buy-in earlier and have stuff to show off to people. The other thing is probably starting to gather leads earlier. So like running, I guess, advertising even just way earlier, or like gathering emails, is so important to launching a Kickstarter or a backer kit in this particular case. That and then just even looking, I'm focusing on the backer kit right now because I'm like in it.
Right.
But and then I look at the actual goal being the amount that it is. Like right now, the backer kit's at 18,000, and that, because that is me knowing that I'll be able to have enough art, hopefully, to create a product that I'm satisfied with, because that's where the money is going. And also, I will still have to work another job part time, and this is mostly coming out of my pocket. So like there's no chance at this point of making money from this process. It's more about making a game from this process.
Right.
So yeah, there's definitely a lot of that. I think even the pursuit of a hardcover book in general, I wonder if I would have gone that direction in the first place. And I don't know the answer to this, but I think that if I just stayed heads down creating a game and made it purely digital, I wonder if I would have more folks interested in, or rather, I maybe not interested, but I would be further along in that process because I wouldn't be juggling as much as I am now. I'd have closer to a completed game, and I kind of wonder if that's, yeah, I don't know. It's really hard to say.
Now we're getting to our deep cuts session.
Yeah, Jeff. Jeez.
Whoa. But I mean, truthfully, what you say is really hard because, first of all, tabletop RPGs are a hard space in. I mean, we obviously don't come from a position of having published anything of any note at all. So,
or anything, period.
Yeah, that's true. But it's really fascinating you say it because these are challenges that I'm sure that obviously you one time you get through it, you go, okay, well that didn't go the way you wanted it to. But what if you've learned valuable lessons here, and it sounds like you've got some great ideas that if you did have to do it again, or you're getting ready for that second project, now you're like, okay, now I've been in there, because I'm sure that a lot of people have gone through these growing pains too. And is there a Kickstarter backer kit guide to doing this? I mean,
being successful.
I mean, there's a bunch of information out there, and I've certainly run through a lot of it. Probably more information out there that's trying to sell you on the how to do a Kickstarter well. But yeah, I think when it comes down to it, though, just to kind of riff on Jeff's question earlier, so if you're making a game like this, it should be just for everybody's advice. Don't do it the way that I did it. Not just from the art side, but also like I'm not known within this industry. I come from a far off place that
land far away, known as
exactly
the video game industry.
And being ingrained in the community, so you see content creator, or rather, Shadow Dark gets super popular. DC20, Dungeon Coach has like a frothing fan base already because he has done so much homebrew for D&D that he already has that well established base. So I think one of the ways that you can, we see all these like massive successes, because those are the ones that we talk about,
right?
Where certain game, 2 million in just a few days or whatever. I think realistically, you've capitalized on a niche market, which, so like with Shadow Dark in particular, like people they were looking for that product. And I don't think that we all knew it until we saw it, so, and then of course, so like massively successful, and also a really amazing product, and well constructed, and everything else. This game in particular, I am doing the wrong thing where I'm like it started from an idea of, I like D&D, and also I would really like the people who DM for me to make my life a little bit more difficult, challenging. And we all have, I do a lot of analysis on D&D with some of the folks that I know in real life, just through podcasting and that sort of thing. But and we all have our ideas of what D&D could be.
Sure.
But it's all, you can homebrew it all into D&D up until a point where it may as well be a different game. So Brent, I know you're saying like, what was it, D&D characters or cyberpunk characters in D&D the other day, like don't do that, right? Yeah. Just
I've heard that analogy a few times.
So it's kind of like that, where Distal isn't niche enough to say like, oh, that's new and different, because it's not, it wasn't meant to be that. It's meant to be, I don't want to say a replacement for D&D, and it's certainly not better than D&D. That anybody who says that is off their nut. But the idea was to create something that is that a lot of people can see, be familiar with, understand the mechanics for, and then hopefully align with the goals that I have or goals that I would have had from D&D, but just aren't getting it.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know where I'm going with this thought. Sorry.
No,
Well,
it's
okay.
What I was going to say is I think that's one of the things that's the coolest about the game is it's familiar with some of D&D like tropes and dice mechanics and stuff like that, but like it's far enough away that it does feel new to me when I look at it, like with the reimagining of the characters and the death marks and things like that. It's like it's definitely not a D&D clone, and I think that's what's great about it. And
Right.
like and I think that's what's cool about it. That's one of the things that made me the happiest when we started reading it, because there's a lot of D&D clones out there and we don't need those per se.
Well,
right. It's
and
really
the
hard
hardest
to market this particular game, because I think that it would be easy to say like, oh, it's another D&D clone, until you actually like open up the rules and kind of go through it. And so there's that little baby gate there that a lot of people aren't willing to cross, because it takes time and effort and interest. So that's where the like create advice again, create a more niche product, something that is just like, oh, that I never would have thought of that, and those things become successful more easily because it's easier to.
Okay.
Pause. Oh, there he is. We temporarily lost you, so we'll but just for like 1 second. It'll be create a more niche product is I think the last thing that I heard. So we'll keep it as it's all good. No, I think it's really, I think you've got some good stuff there, and that I think you're having a hard time to necessarily like, because I think that's one of the comments that we got was that D&D clones have to be careful, and I think that you're not trying to make a D&D clone in our opinion or anything like that. So we feel very strongly about the game, that it's a very neat, like I said, conceptually from start to finish, it's very neat, and the fact that you have done it kind of all on your own is super cool. Like that's really impressive, because I don't think I have the ability myself to sit down and the discipline to do those kind of things. So I think it's pretty fascinating. And now I guess I know we've gone for quite some time here, but I wanted to kind of give everybody a chance. Did we have any other questions we wanted to get out there before we wrapped up for today, or are we? Because this was honestly, I appreciate you being so honest and forthcoming with all this stuff.
We appreciate it. As far as questions, my brain was broken when Cyberpunk D&D character came up again. I just started shooting steam out my ears, so I got nothing.
Jeez. Yeah. If you want to trigger Brent, that's the easiest way to trigger him, is to remind him. Because that was like that. What was that Cyberpunk show on Netflix? That
Edge Runners.
Edge Runners. Yeah. It was the Edge Runners thing where people were like, Edge Runners is like a cool anime. And don't get me wrong, I love the anime. It was amazing. But my first goal wasn't, let's create this in D&D. Like,
the most frustrating thing, like I said about that article, and I've said this over and over again, is they didn't mention the game that the characters came from. They were just like, here's how to make these guys in D&D. And I'm like, or you could play Cyberpunk. That never came up at all, ever.
So there's a company that published that whole system.
But they didn't. They said D&D. You should make these characters in D&D. And
it's the dog whistle. It's the dog whistle. I don't have any questions. What I want to say, not just to you, Wrel, but to our viewers, is that this is a really interesting product. We are getting nothing out of interviewing you other than getting to meet you and interact with you, which is really cool. I put my money where my mouth is, and I am a backer on backerkit. That was my decision before we even arranged this episode, because I liked what I saw. There are some really interesting things, and if you're tempted at all, go to the backerkit link, take a look at the alpha stuff, read it, see if it interests you, and if it does, help Wrel out, back this thing. I would love to see this published personally.
I'll go one step further and tell people not to buy the new Vecna book, and instead go buy Distal, because everybody seems to hate it. So just go buy a good book you'll like.
Aw.
Yeah. Well, at least early reviews are out basically saying, and I think the TLDR is not enough Vecta, too weird.
Well, I read a Twitter today. The guy was like, "I love D&D, but why do they keep putting books out that make me want to slam my head into a wall?"
Oh, I saw that one, and then they essentially said the Vecna. It's essentially a Marvel movie. It's essentially Endgame.
Yeah,
It's a weird, whatever. There are better products out there. There are new, fresh, cool ideas. Find them. They are out there. I don't care if you go to Reddit, your local game store, you listen to us. There is a lot of good content out there. Go just look at Drive Through RPG. Just find the thousands of games you didn't know existed.
You should go to this guy's link first. This guy's
you should go to Wrel's link first.
Wherever the link is. I will say one other thing that I did think of. So D&D and in Dead by Daylight. What?
Yeah, you must handle the social media.
I do,
yeah.
I don't understand it either. Although Dead by Daylight, they're real good at acquiring licenses to use, because man, there's a lot of them in their game now. So, but yeah.
It's okay. Yeah, I think we haven't actually touched an actual D&D session. We've used D&D products obviously to help us maybe make adventures and all those kind of things, but we really like the indie scene. And honestly, I think we can say this is, Distal is probably one of the best games we've seen in a bit that nobody's ever heard of, honestly. And I know, Wrel, you had mentioned that, you've been trying to get the word out there and stuff like that. And so we hope that we can help in any way. And so more eyeballs is good. So with that, I think we'll go ahead and call it. Honestly, thank you for stopping by and being our first guest. It's been really fun. If you want to hang out and do future things, we're open for you to stop by anytime. Open invitation. Awesome. And of course, if you do want to leave comments for us, of course, on this YouTube video, go ahead, shoot us a comment. We love talking with people in the comments and all that stuff. Brent is our social media person. He is in one of these corners. I don't know how this all works anymore. And so, but if you don't want to do that, we'll of course, leave Wrel's socials and stuff like that, so you can get in touch with him and via social media and all that stuff. But how do we get in touch with us though, if people want to do that?
Yeah. It's primarily Brent. You search for @RollWise on Facebook, Threads, Twitter, or YouTube, or you just email us, and that gets all three of us, rollwiseguys@gmail.com.
And as always, thank you for being here. Thank you, Wrel, for being here. We really do appreciate it.
Thank you, Wrel.
Roll well, roll wise, and be safe out there.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye, everybody.